There are fundamental issues with this government that are going to cost Albertans, and they are costing Albertans.
The Discourse starts right now with Cheryl Oates and Erica Baroudis.
Welcome to Season 3 of The Discourse.
We took the summer off, but we cannot sit on the sidelines any longer. We are back for another season of political hot takes and analysis.
And we're starting this season off with some juicy stuff. Now, we promised that we'll be covering the Alberta teachers' strike when they inevitably can't reach an agreement, and we will cover how the real Carney has now stood up and put his elbows down.
But this week, we are all about Alberta, and specifically the resurgence of the Alberta Party. We are taping this on Thursday, and last night the Alberta Party voted to rename the party, once led by Stephen Mandel, to the Progressive Conservative Party. Now, I will say that today, this is not official. The party website says we are pleased to announce that the membership of the Alberta Party voted overwhelmingly to amend the name of the party on August 27, 2025 in a special general meeting. Details of the new party name will be announced once same is confirmed by Elections Alberta. So we await the confirmation from Elections Alberta, but we kind of know where this is heading. Naming a party, changing names from one name to another. Conservatives know this very well in Alberta is no easy thing to do.
That we do. And I know that our two guests have had a very busy and public 2025 so far. After ending the spring session in the Alberta legislature sitting across from their former UCP team, Scott Sinclair, MLA for Lesser Slave Lake, and Pete Guthrie, former Minister of Infrastructure and MLA for Airdrie Cochrane, announced their intent to bring back the Progressive Conservative Party. Now, as Cheryl mentioned, that came with a lot of things happening over the summer, including some pushback from the United Conservative Party, including a legal letter stating that the PC Alberta name, logo, and goodwill were being used by people with no right to do it. The executive director of the party, Dustin Von Vood, goes on to say their attempt to usurp the goodwill associated with our legacy party in order to confuse voters and avoid the hard work of building a political movement, in particularly insulting to the thousands of former PC party members and supporters who are now contributing members of the UCP. Now, he also goes on and references a provision in the Elections Act that restricts a new party from adopting a name similar to that of a predecessor party to a merger. But plot twist, ladies and gentlemen, this doesn't apply to a party that already exists. And therefore, the Alberta Party has every ability thus far to change its name.
So to sum all of that up, the news of the summer is the PCs are back in Alberta, at least in name, once Elections Alberta confirms it. And the leaders of that party, or the two guys that are leading the movement of that party, are two MLAs who have left the UCP, and we are so glad to have them as guests on our show today because we know, and I know having conversations with folks across Alberta this summer, people have a ton of questions. So Scott Sinclair and Pete Guthrie, welcome to the Discourse.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, Cheryl is going to ask our first question because you guys have made it very clear that you like her more than you like me. But first, to our listeners, have you ever wanted to learn how the government works, how to influence public policy, and how to run an effective campaign? Well, the Macamee College Applied Politics and Public Affairs Diploma program is a first of its kind that does exactly that. With expert instructors in everything from stakeholder management to political fundraising, this 2-year program will get you ready to be a part of the change you want to see. Go to macameecollege.com for more details about the program and the September and January admissions intake.
And I am excited to say I'll actually be teaching in that program this fall. Thanks, Erica. We're going to kick it off with a question. I'm sure you guys have told this story so many times over the summer, over the Stampede events, but you were both UCP MLAs. Pete Guthrie, you were a minister in the UCP cabinet. Maybe let's just start with, how did we get here?
Yeah, I guess I'll go first. To try to give a short version, I guess, I had a couple of interesting confrontations, I guess, or presentations to cabinet, which ultimately on February 25th led to me stepping down from cabinet, that is. And I really just could not in good conscience remain as part of a government that, allows corruption or participates in concealing it, or at least the perception of it. And I felt like to remain would be to be complicit. 50 days later, I was removed from caucus and began sitting as an independent. And during that last month of session, I was approached by somebody who said that they had the reserve name PCAA, or at least through a friend of a friend. Scott and I had decided that, yes, this is definitely something that we're interested in pursuing, but we need to get through session. So at the end of session, we met with this small group, and we decided we're going to pursue a new party, a progressive conservative party. We went out, we started campaigning, and we started gathering up signatures. About 2 weeks into that process, we got a cease and desist from the UCP. We felt that we were in good legal standing, but at the same time, the Alberta Party came to us and they said, hey, we're already an existing party. We're willing to change the name. And so we decided to pursue that because there was a lot of advantages to it. Getting us there quicker is a major one. And then last night, there was a successful vote, 94%, to move forward with the name change. So we'll be applying to Elections Alberta either today or tomorrow on the use of the name Alberta Progressive Conservative Party. Now, Scott and I, we hold memberships in the Alberta Party, but we still remain as independent MLAs until which time that name change occurs.
Okay, and I know you have a little bit of different stories about how you each got here. So Scott, why don't you jump in as well and talk about your journey from leaving as a sitting UCP MLA to now being where you are now on this journey to rebranding the Alberta Party as a progressive conservatives and leading some of that movement.
Sure. Thanks, Cheryl. I think it ended up being quite fortuitous that Pete and I ended up being the two members removed. I like to tell people we weren't actually real close before that because I'm pretty new and we knew each other a little bit, but we certainly got to know each other pretty fast. I was pretty lonely in the house when I was removed from caucus. I had to spend, I think, the first week or so sitting by myself on a lonely island there in the legislature. But I got removed for what was initially social media posts criticizing the budget and, a lot of the core fiscal responsibilities of balancing budgets that I believe we get elected on as conservatives in this province. But also at the same time, I think a lack of, I would say, fair, equitable sharing when it comes to resources, not just in my riding, but also Northern Alberta. But specifically, there was some things in my riding that I highlighted. And from there, it led to some conversations initially where I thought everything would be okay, but didn't go the way I wanted. And the Premier and caucus removed me on a Friday. And then after that, like I said, I spent a little bit of time by myself in session as an independent member, which was a real whirlwind there for a while. And then when Pete got removed, we started to have more conversations about some of the, I would say initially it would be probably the fiscal concerns that we had. And then we started to kind of build out our paths similarly. Initially, I think neither one of us thought about starting our own party, but as session progressed, and I would say another big moment was Bill 54 and the separation conversation that really changed the game for me. And that made it a lot easier to be removed from the party at that time, but it also made it kind of interesting and exciting to talk about what a new future might look like. And the conversations happened fairly quickly initially. And that's when it led to the announcement about initially the Progressive Conservative Party, and then kind of to where we are here by end of summer, which is now merging with the Alberta Party. That happened officially last night. And then hopefully we'll have an official name change that will be ratified by the Elections Commissioner in the not too distant future. But I don't know if that summarizes that quickly enough. There's a lot of heartache, laughs, crying probably in between there, but I don't know how long your show is, so I'll just leave it at that for now.
Oh, we'll get to all of those emotions, Scott. Don't you worry. But I do want to ask, because I've known you both and Pete for a longer amount of time, but from the UCP kind of era in your life. And so, I think we talked to you guys at Stampede. You were saying you're getting good reception about what you've done. Can you maybe take some time, and we'll start with you, Pete, and then Scott, on how your constituents feel, as well as maybe touching on what's happened with your party board? Have they come to join you, or are you now distant neighbors?
Right. I would say that the response has been very good from constituents. They understand that I made a principle-based decision, and the feedback into my office has been, overwhelmingly positive, like in the order of several hundred positive to like less than 5 negatives. And, as an MLA, getting those positive emails is no easy task because, like most people, when they're writing into a government office, they're writing to complain. So, it really felt good to be able to get that kind of support. On the board level, over the 6 years, I'm sure you've seen this, Erica, the UCP boards, the complexion has changed considerably. Um, many of the PCs have been kind of pushed out and replaced by some that are, holding or have special interests. So ideas and topics such as the Alberta Pension Plan, Alberta Police Force, separation. Now, for my board, I communicated some of the issues that I was encountering at the UCP at the government level along the way. So they were not completely surprised when I stepped down, but I would say about half the members left, but I still have a good relationship with those that remain. And in fact, we had a Stampede barbecue here that had probably 1,000 people from the community come. And we had some of those board members that remain come and help and support. So yeah, I mean, it feels good. We've had great support both from the board level and constituent level.
From my end of things, initially my board was 110% behind me. I'd say they even wrote me a pretty strong support letter after my Facebook post, and even after I was removed from caucus. When I announced the party and the idea of Progressive Conservative Party, I think that changed it a little bit for some of the board members. The board members, and I'm pretty new to this, we have kind of I'm sure like most CAs, a hodgepodge of people. And I certainly have supporters of mine personally on the board. And I would say after the AGM, the ones that supported me personally probably are taking a different path and then are going to come join me on this journey as well. And then there's a mixed bag of people that are probably disappointed in the party stuff, but still very supportive of my principled stance. And then there's a few that are, I would say, Danielle Smith loyalists, and there is no information that will ever change their minds about their loyalty to this premier and maybe even the party to a lesser degree. But as far as the board, that's how I'd say it went for me. But in terms of my constituency, by far the most positive and warm reception I've had straight across the board. I've always been somebody who's tried to be the type of politician that still sounds like a normal person when you talk to me and relatable. And I've always kind of made a commitment to being that kind of MLA. I'm very new to politics, as you know, Erica, for sure. And Pete knows, only a couple of years in, but been going to all the community events in my riding like usual. And this is by far the most popular I've ever been. Typically in this job, you're walking on eggshells sometimes at events, nervous about people coming up to you. And like Pete said, you don't get a lot of people coming up and thanking you for good fiscal governance or anything like that as an MLA. But this is the opposite. I've had random people, and I think people, and this is where the centrist part of our movement is important on where we're going to sit politically, is people that I think maybe didn't vote for the party have come up to me and said, like, regardless of what party name you have, I stand by what you did, and I will vote for you because we believe in the principled stance and your character. So very similar to Pete, very, very positive reception, and people are very happy. There's always going to be the people that are more emotionally driven by politics, but by and large, it's been very positive.
Pick up on a little bit of sentiment that you offered when you were talking about, like, there are some people out there that are just going to support Danielle Smith. There's no information that could change your mind. This might be assumed because you have both left the UCP that there is animosity there. But when you talk to the public and you're looking for people to, assuming leave the UCP and come and vote for the next iteration of the PCs in the next election, what is that sentiment you're trying to capture? Like, are people upset with this government? Are they disappointed with this government? Is this government not doing what it said it would do? Like, what is the main emotion there that you're trying to capture as you hope to bring people over to your side?
I would say just probably overall a sense of like normalcy. People, one of the speeches I made at the end of session, like a man in the arena speech is what I called it online, but like it resonated really well with people. I got a very strong response from both sides of the aisle politically. And I think, one of the lines in there is something along, I think, saying, even if we disagree in these times, we should still be able to do that and not hate each other. And this premier has taken this party to I would say, pretty far to the other side now. And it's not just left or right. I think it's the hostilities that have been created by her. So the sentiment, I would say, is just balance. decency, being able to have conversations with people without hating them online or in the legislature. And I think a lot of people resonated with what Pete and I are initially trying to say with that. And that's a party that's driven by boring government, positivity, being able to have discussions like we are today on both sides of the aisle without having to be so absolute in our decisions, because we talked about our kids in school earlier. I mean, I have a chaotic young family here, and there is no decision that is black and white in my life. Everything is some version of a compromise. And I think that part right there is what's important to most people, is trying to find like more balance in government.
Is that how you feel too, Pete? Do you feel that the current premier is dividing the province?
Yeah, I guess, on, that kind of comes down to that question of unity, and how do you keep conservatives united? And I think, one of the aspects of that is, concentrating on, what we share and those values, being results oriented, not creating division. It comes from delivering as a government, delivering solutions, and not in constant battles. And this UCP government, they choose to be in conflict because they think that it sells. So whether that's with Ottawa or doctors or nurses or educators or the public service or even other provinces, the UCP is fighting rather than out there building partnerships. So it's that, us versus them attitude that they have. And when you do that, you create enemies along the way. So yeah, I think I would agree wholeheartedly with the sentiments there of Scott's.
I want to come back to questions about unity, and you are creating some potential divide given you have now two conservative parties running against each other. But maybe talk about what you would do differently. You mentioned the Ottawa situation. You mentioned fighting with teachers and nurses and all of these things. Like and you can answer this as Pete Guthrie and Scott Sinclair. You can answer it as your entity that you're starting to build. But like, what would you do differently?
How do you deal with there's numerous issues that we have out there. There's, from a fiscal side of things, we should be aiming to complete projects that are what Albertans actually need versus what the premier or the office wants. Stop growing the size of government, and instead look at productivity increases and improving the culture of the workplace. Work on stabilizing markets and reducing uncertainty. Like all of the battling and stuff, it just makes other jurisdictions look at you and say, hey, that's maybe not an area that we want to invest in. This UCP government, they're meddling with the AER and ISO, firing all the AIMCO representatives, and then you put in an unqualified former deputy minister of the premier. The talk of separation, yada, 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 like all of these things hurt. So, stop investing in areas with high risk, cost overruns, and, focus on job creation, investment, in areas that are, that are known to come in on time and on budget, and stop taking risky moves. I guess that would be a good start.
Yeah. And okay, so I hear you saying a few things about specific programs or unqualified deputy ministers, things like that. Obviously, that's your opinion. But can you maybe get a little bit more into the detail about what projects? Because I don't think most Albertans look at it maybe from the same perspective that you do, given that you were the Minister of Infrastructure. And I want to press you on like maybe some more details on what you'd actually do if you were in this position.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of areas of concern. Let's start with sole source contracts. The Tylenol deal is a prime example. That's $70 million, and we got $0 in value. That's what taxpayer dollars went to. But, the UCP is doing these same sole source contracts all over government in recovery, surgical contracts, charter schools, crown land development. They're even looking to do it in urgent care centers upcoming and hospitals. There's areas like this is one that was brought up by Scott in the House, is new carpets and kitchens and China for the premier. Junkets, these are government paid holidays for MLAs and ministers to fly around the world on the taxpayer dime with little actual government work going on. Arena deals. Another example is this rail plan that they're working on right now. They just skipped a feasibility study and went straight into a plan for development. Like that's a boondoggle in the making. And so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about risky moves. Supporting private schools in their capital bills is another example. This is something that's coming, that the government's been looking towards and that the premier has committed to. We'd be the only jurisdiction in all of Canada to do that. And then the big one being the healthcare reorganization. I mean, this is going to be massively over budget and was done so without a lot of foresight and planning. So, I mean, I think that's a pretty good subset of areas of concern that we could look at.
Okay, thanks for that, Pete. That's really helpful and very specific. Obviously, you have a lot of inside information and knowledge about how things are currently working in the UCP and in the government. What I wanted to ask you guys, because the PC brand has been around in Alberta for a really long time, as you know, which is why it's so valuable. Part of that is progressive and part of that is conservative. So I'm hoping, because you guys have talked about this as not necessarily socially progressive as we've historically thought about the PCs in Alberta, but socially responsible. And to me, that was like a big flag. Like, we're not talking about being socially progressive. We're talking about being socially responsible. What's the difference?
I don't think it's super complicated. It's about a government that delivers services efficiently, that thinks about and cares about values like fairness, equality, justice, compassion. It means that there's having checks and balances on a system and with independent oversight, something that, I brought up in the House and within cabinet. And then having consequences for not adhering to the rules. So it's like just being a government that people can count on and trust. So fiscal prudence, of course, always is part of that. But, upholding the law and protecting our populations, vulnerable populations, and just lead by example and stay out of people's hair and let them live.
And when it comes to specific social issues, and the most recent ones I can think of in Alberta are transgender youth access to healthcare and book banning, like we would call those kind of like social issues in Alberta. Where do you sit on the political spectrum when it comes to things like this on social issues?
Well, I think one issue in particular that differentiates us between this current UCP government is that we do not want to separate. We want to stay in Canada. And that's become a social issue that I think is really, really bothering people, the majority of people in this province. The premier's taken what was supposed to be a party, all Conservatives are welcome under one big banner, and she's really being driven by a smaller portion of them and taking it farther to the right, where I think moderate Conservatives or small C Conservatives, wherever you want to call them, just don't feel comfortable with it anymore. And this what was initially maybe a slow creep of Donald Trump style politics has become very prevalent in the tone of the party. And go back to that absolute word, where some of the discussions seem to be if you're not for separation, then you can't be conservative, and how can you love being Canadian and be conservative at this time? And that's the tone that the party has taken. I think that's a pretty big issue, I think, for a lot of people. Cheryl, in terms of a couple of the ones you mentioned earlier, I think it goes back to one of the issues that this premier has, which is distracting people with really emotionally driven issues instead of fixing the larger problem. Like, we're not talking about education because we're talking about the book ban, and we're picking fights with teachers that I know, we might have a strike coming up in the next week or so. And that's, for someone who has two daughters in school, that has a massive impact on my life every single day. Where issues like the book ban, I mean, they're certainly important to people, and like I said, it's a emotionally driven issue, but it's not something that is affecting my family's life certainly every single day like a teacher strike is. So just trying to find, like, prioritizing what's important. I think supper table conversations with Albertans instead of having these issues that I think are meant to distract because she's doing such a terrible job. And I'd say she does it with a couple other ones as well. But that would be one comment I'd make that certainly makes us different. And I think that also makes us attractive to a lot of people in this province, is that we're going to focus on the things that matter to them every single day. And, the amount we spend on education per capita is the lowest in the province. I mean, in the country, pardon me. So it's easier for the premier to have both sides of the aisle arguing over book bans while we fail our teachers, who are arguably the most important people outside of parents to the growth of our kids in this province.
Can I just ask a follow-up question just on how you will balance the progressive and the conservative? Because coming from the progressive side of politics, like when I look at fiscal issues, I come from the place we need to protect social services, we need to protect healthcare, we need to protect education, even if oil plummets. And if you come in from the perspective that we need to balance the books as a priority, how can you do both? Like, can you protect social services and can you balance the books at a time when oil is forecast to drop pretty dramatically over the next year?
Once again, this boils down to we have a financial update that's going to come out either today or tomorrow. The UCP are anticipating a $5.4 billion deficit this year. That's based on $68 oil. Right now, I think in the first quarter, they traded somewhere in the order of 63.50, I think is where oil traded over that first quarter. So there's about a $3.50 deficit. From the perspective of the differential, the UCP were very conservative where this is concerned, and they used a $17 differential when it's going to come in somewhere between 11 and 12. So they actually may get a gain in Q1 on the price of oil. But ultimately here, the spending is a problem for the UCP. The Premier has increased the budget by 23%, going beyond the fiscal rules. To grow the budget to a point where we now require $75 oil to balance the budget. Smith is also massively growing the size of government. From 2019 to 2022, we had a 7.5% reduction in the size of the GOA. Since Smith, the UCP has increased that by 14% and is creating crown corporations at a rate of 2 or 3 per year. And I went through some of the areas of concern before, like wasted spending. We have to be focused. And I talked about sole source contracts and arena deals and rail plans, and that sort of thing. And what's happening is the UCP, like they're translating that overspend into cutting of AISH payments, cutting maintenance costs. They did the tax cut, but they also increased the education and property tax as a clawback. And the UCP, they're finding ways to be able to make cuts in areas where they may not take the blame, like the cut to municipalities. They're forcing them to increase taxes to compensate. And the UCP are good with that, naturally, because they can blame the munis. But look, I mean, they're looking at all sorts of things and exploring ways to access more debt and increasing their risk on their investment portfolios. So, there's some serious issues there. And I think it's about being focused on their agenda of fiscal responsibility and limited government, being transparent and accountable, and getting off of all this alternative agenda stuff like separation that Scott brought up, where the focus is not where it should be on providing returns for Alberta.
So, Pete, there's actually a lot that you said there on stuff I've criticized the UCP for and the budget. I mean, I, like Scott, was very frustrated with running a deficit, on being optimistic. Like right now, I still don't get them say they're out of the woods on actually running a balanced budget. Yeah, it looks great in Q1, but what's that going to look like at the end of the year? And so I hear some of those things of campaign promises of the tax cut, but the municipal funding. I guess my thing is what you're saying is you're really criticizing the government on things I agree with, that I wish that they were smaller government. I wish they were focused on some priorities that are maybe different. But I guess what I'm struggling to understand, and maybe I'll throw this to Scott, is the person that came out and this whole thing started because you didn't agree with a deficit in a budget. What are you guys going to do, and where are you going to find that balance? Like you said, fighting with teachers. Well, do you give teachers all of this, which then would put us in an even higher deficit because that isn't even a cost if we're in the collective bargaining of the budget? Like, how are you guys going to tell Albertans that you can truly be progressive conservative and that, you will still be better at balancing a budget than this current government? Like, I guess I'm just struggling to understand how you guys are going to be able to find that balance and what you're going to communicate to Albertans on how you're going to do so.
I think that's a fair follow-up question. To reiterate, Pete made a couple really important points on transparency and accountability when it comes to spending. So one of the reasons he got into hot water, and I was still in caucus when he was defending his position on this, was his push for a financial oversight committee. So that would be one simple solution to what you're talking about, Erica, about some of these frustrations is, well, where's the money going to come from? Where's the money going to come from? But if you have a committee that is looking into some of this, sole source contracts that are coming in way too high, you could see projects coming in, like a hospital project, if it's $20 million over budget or bloated, they'll start to add up when you do 40 to 50 spends like that a year quite quickly. And I think that would be one easy example, is instituting some of the fiscal principles that it basically got removed for making them public. But that would have been an easy one. And as conservatives, I don't know, I really struggled with that when I was still in caucus, because I didn't know why we would run and hide from that. That's something that is really easy to defend as a conservative, and it's something we win elections on, like I mentioned earlier. So that would be an easy start. And then I would say the other thing is the spending on wants instead of needs. Pete mentioned the arena deal. That was something that I was pretty frustrated with. And I think even Edmontonians are frustrated with. If they have to get money from the province and that's the only way to get it, I'm sure they would take it. But I don't think that's a priority spend, is giving billionaires money when there is other priorities to spend. I'm not saying it would be perfect when it comes to covering the cost of teachers or education. We do have, massive population growth that's happening, and that's real. But when you look at, Cheryl would know this, the difference in the Notley government and them getting basically run through the coals by anyone who's in the opposition side, myself included, over their deficit spending. They were running deficits, I think, somewhere in the $5 billion mark, like a $50 billion budget. And the amount of spending that the premier has, and a lot of it's on, I would say, starting up Crown Corps, helping out insiders or friends of the party, has really not matched inflation or the population growth. Like the percentages that Pete's talking about are extremely disappointing to hear when I speak to constituents back home about the growth in government, because we're supposed to be trying to find the best value for money for Albertans right now. And a lot of people just don't believe that's happening. And of course, oil is a roller coaster that we want to try to find some balance there. But right now, this premier and this UCP government, sort of the worst of both worlds. They're overspending on frivolous things, and then still not balancing budgets. So that's going to make it tough.
Can you maybe cover the details of the Financial Oversight Committee? Like, would that be as a part of Treasury Board? Would that be an offshoot? Would it be caucus members only? Where would it fit into the process? I like the idea, so I'm curious.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll deal with a couple of things first, as far as areas that identify the errors. And this is greater than, than we talk about there being, corruption, cronyism, sole source contracts, and all of that. Let's set that aside. There are fundamental issues with this government that are going to cost Albertans, and they are costing Albertans. I'll give you an example here right now. Inside of the top 5 riskiest projects that you can do, this is worldwide. Number 1 is nuclear. Nuclear comes in on average 120% over budget each and every time, and can potentially go as high as 1,000% over budget. They have a tendency to be 65% longer than schedule, most of the time going several 100% higher. But what else is in there? High tech, new technology, as well as high-speed rail. Now, let's compare that to what are those projects that come in, have a tendency to come in on time and on budget. Solar, wind, and natural gas generated electricity. The top 2 there, this province has eliminated from potential growth in this province, and natural gas has been virtually eliminated because of the feds. So the next example that I would give here would be from the perspective of this healthcare restructure. This was brought forward with, let's say, without any planning, without any design. They did not have a business plan. It was effectively a loose idea that was brought forward. They didn't have a team built. They didn't have people on side, and there was people asking for it, but they didn't have it. Now, when you look at one of the questions you should be asking yourself when you're, in government is, what's the worst that can happen? I mean, we do this at home. What's the worst that can happen? Well, when you're in the planning stage, the worst that can happen is you got to back up. You lose some days, but it didn't cost you a lot of money. In healthcare, when you're doing healthcare restructuring on the fly, not only are going to have massive budget increases, but you have healthcare risks. Potentially, people could die because of the issues that you're bringing forth. This is fundamental problems that this government has, and it's why they're failing and they're going to fail. Now, to your question about Financial Oversight Committee, is something that I brought forward in May of 2024. What I propose is bringing together all of those ministries that have some financial acumen: transportation, infrastructure, finance. Naturally, you need to have justice in there, jobs and economy. What you would have is the ministers and the deputy ministers work as a committee. It would be under finance, and they would provide advice on large major projects or negotiations that are going on with the federal government. One of the examples here is the childcare deal. The childcare deal, this was negotiated between two organizations, both childcare federally and child services provincially. And the two groups had no financial acumen. They created a deal that in 3 years from now is going to put our province $1 billion short. These are major problems. They need to have that advice. So you would still leave them as the lead, but you have this committee to be able to provide oversight. And this is another example of what I'm talking about, where it's this inexperience in planning, design, taking your time and act slowly, or pardon me, think slowly, act quickly. That's an adage that this government should adopt.
So thanks for that, Pete. I know you guys have been so generous with your time. I do want to ask one last question before we wrap you up here. And that is, a lot of people are wondering, is this going to be a real thing? Are they going to get off the ground? Are they going to be in contention in the next election? So as we build towards the next election, can you give us an idea of how you build the support and raise the money you need to be a real alternative come the next Alberta election?
Assuming that the election is going to be 2 years from now in the fall of 2027, there's a lot of work to be done. You're right. Obtaining the name is one small thing, but we have to build membership, raise funds, develop policy and platform, create constituency associations, and find candidates, just to name a few. So there's a lot of work to be done. This has to do with engagement, people, funding. So we'll be looking to set our goals in the coming days and weeks and then expand on it. But I think we'll be just looking to lead with integrity and honesty. And I think that our market is going to be wide because of this. There's a lot of people that are out there that don't have a political home because both the UCP and NDP are focused on their bases. So we will definitely be able to capture a large part of that market. And I think we'll be able to draw voters from all sides.
If I could just follow up with what Pete said, I think the last part might be the most important in terms of what the path looks like for our demographic is the people who feel like they don't have a home politically is I believe the majority of Albertans right now. And we have two parties that have become so ideologically driven over the last 10 years that people don't feel comfortable maybe voting there, but maybe they vote against the other party. And we want to give them something to vote for that not only makes them comfortable, but they feel proud doing it and they feel proud discussing it with their friends and their family. And I think that starts with the tone being positive, being more normal. I keep saying it's hard to describe it. And I think we're going to work out a lot of the building out now that we have the name change sorted out. And when you're talking about, Pete mentioned, if the election happens in 2027, then we have definitely a few years to make our case to the people and hopefully get them to convert this from momentum and an idea into capturing them into building a party, which will be a big challenge for sure. But I think it's worth doing right now. I think there's lots of really important issues. Separation's a big one that have really made this an opportunity to unite the middle of this province and come right up the center and provide people with another choice, especially if things are only going to get, I think, more interesting in terms of controversies here for the UCP government. And I think the more people hear about some of these sole source contract and some of the obvious corruption, I think that a lot of the moderates on the conservative side will start to feel more comfortable voting for us, and that will give us an opportunity to form government. and I look forward to making the case.
Well, as Cheryl said, like we really appreciate your time today and some of the insights into what you're doing. As someone that has helped get a party off the ground, I hope you guys are ready because it's a lot of work, all of those AGMs and things to get it running. But it sounds like you guys have the passion and desire to do so. So we will definitely be keeping an eye on this, and would love to have you guys back in the future to get an update.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks, Erica.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, Cheryl. I'd just like
Thank
to
you.
say, as right now our caucus is only 2 males right now, you guys have both made great candidates in our
I ain't helping you with anything. Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Have a good day. See ya.
So, Cheryl, I'm going to ask you a question because I think that there was a lot of great things that would be appealing to Albertans, but do you think they can actually do this, make this happen?
Well, this is the question, and I asked it because it's the question I've heard everywhere over the summer since they announced that they'll be, rejuvenating the PC brand is, can these guys actually do it? And I don't know. Like, if they have a 2-year runway, anything is possible. Let's just look at the outcome of the last federal election, look at, some interesting provincial outcomes. Like, anything is possible, especially when you have 2 years.
Mhm.
But you'd have to be remarkable, like to build a party to the point that you are going to garner a significant portion of the population and a significant, not just votes, but also their money to be able to run a full campaign. You'd have to be remarkable over the next 2 years. And that's not to say they can't do it. It's a really big uphill climb, even in taking over an existing party.
Yeah. I mean, we did see BC Conservatives have a big surge, like you said, federal election, even with how the NDP won in 2015, right? With a bunch of candidates that were maybe supposed to be lame duck candidates and got elected, right? So it is possible. I think that the interesting thing here is, one, I wouldn't bet my money on the next election being like either even the official opposition, but maybe down the road, that I think people need to see how they're different. I think one of the big variables too is actually how the UCP performs, because I think they're doing a lot of their strategy talking about separation. Well, what if separation is not a thing in 6 months from now? What if they balance the budget and they start doing smarter spending and smaller government? Like, what if the government pivots a little bit towards that? What if all of these allegations on through AHS turn out to be nothing, right? Like, these
Or
guys have really...
something.
Well, but in something, I think something would be advantageous for them. But I'm saying, like, if all of these things add up, that it's a nothing, I think that would really hurt their intention of running and what they're running off of. Because they're running off of, being mad with the current government and being an alternative to maybe mismanagement and, a large government and things that I frankly, I've been critical of the government for. But what if that's not the UCP play in the years leading up to an election? I think that's going to also really impact people's desire to support this progressive conservative party. I also still don't really know where they sit on the progressive side.
Yeah. And that was like, there's some things that they said, like when Scott Sinclair was saying, we shouldn't be giving billionaires handouts. I was like, what? Am I talking to a New Democrat here? But then
your face.
But then there are some things, like when asked specifically about some issues, and like I completely agree with Scott's answer, like let's not focus on these things. Can we just leave people alone and focus on the big things, like properly funding the education system, rebuilding the healthcare system? Like, can we focus on the big things instead of these divisive distractions? That being said, you still need a position. Like, do you support LGBTQ rights? Like, that's a yes or no question. And if you can't say yes, you're not progressive. You are not socially progressive. And they can't, like, at this point, like, it was not a bad answer, a bit of a dodge. Like, obviously it's not what they want to talk about. And strategically, I see the point to that. But you have to think, like, they're looking at their ridings, wondering where their constituents sit on a socially progressive scale, and they've got to be cognizant of that too.
And like I said, I would have answered the same way Scott did. I wouldn't want to actually have to say yes or no if I was in his position. So good on him and his media training. But you're right, though. It's like, I think they're going to be held accountable for some of those things. Like, he's like, stop. I would have loved if we had an hour with them to be like, okay, what would you do differently in your teacher negotiation? Like,
but that's not really a fair question. Like, because technically they're an opposition party.
Right.
And
No.
opposition
But I
parties
guess
get
what
to
I'm saying is
oppose
like,
without a detailed answer.
yes, we see it from your party every day with
Well, you
no
see it from every
substance.
opposite, and also Pierre Poilievre for like the last years. That is what opposition parties do
Yeah,
because they don't have access to the information that governments have.
well, right. And I'm just saying, like, nope, I don't think anybody wants to strike, right? And so I do hear some of their points. Like I said, I think that there's a lot of really good sound bites. There's a lot of really good, you know, ideas and I think some of their criticisms of the government are totally fair and warranted. However, I think what people are really going to look for if we're playing on this 2-year timeline of an election is like, what are they actually going to do? Not can
For sure.
can I shit on the two parties? I did actually appreciate, because I know we wanted to cover like, where is your hunting ground? Is it the progressives or the small C conservatives from the UCP brand that you're trying to
Mhm.
pull in? I would actually see this maybe being more appealing from taking more New Democrats, because I know a lot of people, and again, this is my life versus yours, but a lot of people that are also frustrated with the NDP or maybe disappointed. So is there room? Again, 2 years is very quick, but it's also a lifetime in politics. So
Yeah.
it's
And I
gonna be
mean,
interesting.
they would have to make an offer. Like, I didn't hear in that
Mhm.
statement of where they stand. And I'm sure they're still building out what their offer is to Albertans. I didn't hear a call to New Democrats in that. What I
Okay,
heard
yeah.
was a call to, if you are a conservative in Alberta and you don't like the game of like picking really divisive issues and, distracting from big things like healthcare reorganization, if you're not interested in talking about like transgender healthcare access, if you're not interested in talking about book bans, if you're not interested in talking about leaving CPP for the last 2 years, if you're interested in talking about real things, like maybe we need to get back to our roots, that's what I heard the call to be. And I think that is a call to conservatives.
No, and I would say I agree. I just mean I think that their opportunity could be New Democrats, but you're right. I didn't hear a lot. I heard a lot of like small government fiscal
Mhm.
accountability. The hard part, and you and I both know this, is like then have to like, what do you pick and choose to cut if you're going to balance a budget, and that's like what your whole principle is? Or they mentioned a few projects which I don't think add up to $5.4 billion.
Well, and the other thing is, and maybe this is a good question for the next time we have them on, what is
Mhm.
their path to victory? Because your proposition looks a lot different. Like cities and rural areas in Alberta have, in a lot of cases, different value systems, different priorities, different ways of looking at politics. If you are planning to run through Calgary, your platform looks a lot different than if you're planning to capture the northern rural seats. And
Mhm.
it's not clear to me who, and maybe it's not clear to them either, who they're talking to yet. Like the message to Calgary, if you're hoping to flip Calgary seats to the new PC party, that message looks a lot different than it does in rural Alberta.
Yeah, I'd love to know where Scott Sinclair is going to run in the next election, if he's going to say in Lesser Slave Lake, which is very, very rural in comparison to, say, Pete's riding of Airdrie Cochrane, right?
Mhm.
I think that, to your point, that is kind of that periphery of a hybrid of maybe where a progressive would better fit is in like a suburban to an urban center riding versus north. And so I guess that'll also be interesting on where they are going to run, as well as where their candidates are. But let me tell you, it is not like what they're saying is having founding meetings, getting bank accounts set up. Like whoever that executive
But
director is going to have like wrinkles.
conservatives have so much practice. It should be fine.
Well, I don't know if they do though. So I'm
I'm
not
sure
going to
they
tell
can
them
find a few
any of
people
my
who lived through the Wild Rose, who lived from the floor crossing, the merger, the different iterations.
Jason
I'm sure
Kenney
they
is
can
just
find.
going to make a comeback.
They can pull some people in from neighboring provinces.
Maybe we'll see. Yeah. I mean, like we said, it's possible. We've seen your party grow significantly to form government. We saw the BC Conservatives come really damn close and they weren't even a party. Like that's a textbook case. It's
Mhm.
possible. I just think, again, there's a lot of variables that are working against them, as well as just the operations to set it up. And setting it up versus setting it up properly are also two different things.
And truthfully, the biggest thing that's standing in their way right now is the ongoing positive sentiment towards Danielle Smith.
Mhm.
Like you can say, I don't like that she's doing this. I don't like that she's doing this. I don't like that she's doing this. And the public may say that too, but they still like her and her numbers are
Yeah.
still good. And until you have a public that's willing to say, like, I've had enough of her, I'm ready for a change. Time for change sentiment is always a great indicator. The economy is going badly and we think it's the government's fault. Like that sentiment doesn't exist right now. And unless it
Mhm.
exists, people will not look for an alternative,
No,
especially
and
not
you know
another
what?
conservative alternative.
I was going to say, we can talk about this next week, but I did go to the Alberta Next panel and I think I told you I was going, but the interesting thing was there was a lot of people And like the premier doesn't need to put herself in that position. She doesn't need to do a roadshow. And like literally, like those rooms are, I would say, overall, like quite divided, meaning like there's the really pro, let's do this, and the really anti. I will say one of the biggest takeaways I had was that there was a lot of people that would shit on what they were doing, but as first be like, I really appreciate that you as the premier are here, or that you're doing this to hear from Albertans. Like this is a democratic, like I appreciate that I get to come here and talk about how much I disagree with you today. And it was even just like people being appreciative. They were like, we don't like you or what you're doing, but like the fact that we actually can come and access you and access like you hearing me for the minute that I get is appreciated. And it was like actually boggled me that people were just like happy that they got that conversation with her.
Yeah.
So I don't think it hurts her numbers.
As long as you stay on the agreed upon topics. If you come with your own grievances, you will get kicked
I
off the
listened
mic
to a
and
lot
silenced.
of people being like, 3 topics ago, we talked about this. And
No,
I
but
saw the clips. I saw the clips and I was like, that did happen for some topics. I think that I'd love to, maybe have a little, like a conversation with Bruce McAllister on moderating.
Decorum.
But yeah, moderating. Like he did a very good job. I think for some parts, there was definitely like screaming and stuff like that of people that I think should have been removed from the conversation or of the room. And he kept going. However, I still think he lost his cool and maybe didn't moderate the way that could have been the whole time. However, there was a lot more than I guess what was played in the clips. And that's why I sat there for 3 fucking hours.
And now I have to mark it explicit. Sorry, Erica's dad. On the next panels,
He's probably
honestly,
bored by now. He has
Can
like the
I speak?
attentions. No, my dad's bored and he already clicked off.
There's so much to say about the Alberta Next panels, and there's so much content in there, and there's so much variety from one meeting to the next. And we have Calgary coming up as well. So I can't wait to do a whole episode on the next panels and what the government got out of it, and more importantly, what we think the public got out of it. But we will save that for there's so much going on this summer. We have so much content to come up. We'll save that for one of our future episodes.
Awesome. So yeah, as we said, we're back. This is season 3. So make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. Make sure to follow us on X, Instagram, and TikTok.
And just a reminder, with the exception of this show coming back, our episodes drop every Thursday morning at 5 a.m. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.
The Discourse is hosted by Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis. Follow on Instagram at The Discourse Pod. Subscribe to The Discourse on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.